Now, why is performance management important? First of all, it will show whether there are any lapses in the agreed service delivery, because every facilities management has a contract. I mean, a contract has got a document where it says what are the service deliverables. So, unless you do a performance management, a evaluation of the services, you will not know whether what has been promised or what has been agreed is being delivered or not. To know the difference or know the gaps, you need a performance measurement system. Otherwise, you will not really know whether the services have been delivered or not. Second, it will forecast if the assets will deteriorate faster. Now, this example I would like to take here is that, for example, in a chiller, there are say 4 quarterly services and 1 annual service, which is a standard practice. Now, in one of the years, the service provider, he doesn't do the annual maintenance of the chiller. Now what happens? The client looks at that, he says, oh sorry, you have not performed the annual maintenance, so I am going to deduct the money for you. The service provider says, okay fine, it is fine, because I have not delivered service, so I don't deserve to be paid for that. It's fair, you don't pay me for this. Now in the second year also, if he misses to do the annual maintenance for this, which is a major maintenance, and then he also doesn't get paid still, but what happens to the machine? The machine has been in operation for 2 consecutive years without the annual maintenance, which will impact the life of the machine. So somewhere there has to be a line drawn to say that, if some services are not performed, how they will impact the life of the asset. And that is what we'll come to know through the performance management. A robust and a strong performance measurement system will enable you to know the longevity of the equipments and how the health or the life cycle of the equipment will be affected. The third point is it will reflect on the possible impact on the customer satisfaction. This is the same point, but in a customer perspective. Like for example, if there are say important calls to be attended within timelines. Now if there are some priority 1 calls which have not been attended, important calls which are not attended within time, the service provider might say, okay fine, as per the contract clauses you penalize me, I am ready to get the hit for that. But what happens to the customer satisfaction? The person who has been affected by this, probably he will spread a bad word about the client. He will say that sorry, it is not a good experience to stay with these people. So customer satisfaction also will be impacted, and that impact can be known beforehand through the performance delivery or the performance management system. And it will enable you to get the value for money. Now this is the simplest reason why you have to have a good performance management system. The company, the client spends millions of dirhams for facilities management. It doesn't come easy. Manpower costs are very high. Every cost is going up these days. All costs are going up. And when company is spending so much money, they want something in return. And it's logical, it's reasonable. There is nothing wrong to expect that you get full value for money. When you go to a hotel and you pay bills, you expect service in return. When you go to a movie, you go to a mall, you purchase things, but you expect some services in return. You don't do charity, right? So likewise, when you pay to the service provider for money for delivering services, you should get a value for money. There is nothing wrong in expecting that. And that can be measured by using a good performance management system. Otherwise, you will be in dark. You will not really know whether you are getting the value for the money that you are spending. And lastly, adherence to statutory compliances. This will show the performance management system will always have one particular area or parameter about the statutory compliances, and these are very important. These are non-negotiable. In this, there is no 99% target. There is always 100% target for statutory compliances, because it will otherwise you are flouting the government's regulations. So statutory compliances adherence is there or not can be known from a good performance management system, because it's a process. It will immediately reflect, it will display, it will point out that something is not happening if the performance management system is good. So these are the reasons why you should have a good performance management system, and these are the benefits of this. Now, enhanced life cycle of assets. This is the extension of the point number 2, where a good performance management system will ensure that the service provider delivers the services as per the contract, and then you get the life of the assets is really enhanced. Without a system, this will not be recorded, and you will not know. You will be in dark whether the assets are being really maintained in a proper condition or not. Now let's go to the key performance indicators. Now all the performance management system is done through something called KPI. Now, the two most popular and the famous terms in any facilities management industry, whether you are from the client side or the service provider side, are the SLA and the KPIs. That is the service level agreements and the key performance indicators. Of course, there are some gray areas in some people's minds. I mean, everyone is not 100% clear about this, but these terms are very widely used and very regularly used by everyone involved in the facilities management. So, the performance management is done through the key performance indicators. These are the areas which have been agreed by both client and service provider at the start of the contract to say that if I fulfill these areas, then you can say that yes, my services are good, otherwise my services are bad. So these particular areas can be called as the key performance indicators, which will tell whether the service is good or bad. This is the evaluation agreed criteria by both service provider and the client. Now, for having good KPIs, you need to have good SLAs, right? Because key performance indicators are coming out from service level agreements. I mean, unless you have a proper service level agreements to say you will do 1, 2, 3, 4, you can't define how you are going to deliver service. SLA is mainly about what is going to be delivered, and KPI is about how it is going to be delivered. SLA is before, KPI is after. I mean, SLA is something before the activity is to happen, because SLA says this activity will happen, and KPI will reflect how this activity has been performed. So, for a good KPI, you need to have a good SLA as well. And now the next, for having a good SLA, you need to have a good contract document with proper deliverables written in this. Now the contract document has to be also very clearly specified. I mean, if contract document is not drafted in a very proper manner, then of course it will have impact on the SLAs and obviously the KPIs as well. And for a good SLA, you have to have the scope has to be properly defined. This is very important because the scope in facilities management industry, incidentally, has been, like it is more of a copy paste with some kind of modification from the routine that has been going on. But it is more than that. So for every new facility, every new asset, the SLAs, the scope has to be customized. It has to be very unique to that particular asset, and accordingly the scope has to be defined. Then the scope will deliver, or scope will show, it will reflect on the SLAs that are required and the KPIs that are there. Now the most critical point comes here is that for having a good scope properly defined, you need to have a good accurate asset register. Now accurate asset register is probably a luxury even today in many of the companies, because assets are so vast, assets are so huge, and any amount of detailing would be inadequate for asset register. So you have to draw a line somewhere to say that yes, this is the limit up to which I am going to call my asset as individual assets. But however, many times it so happens that the assets are not very clearly defined in the asset register. For example, if in a building there are say 3 lifts and you say lift 1, 2, 3, and if you call 5 technicians from the service provider, including their engineer, manager and the supervisor, whoever, and the 5 people from the client side who are involved in facilities, and ask them to name which is lift number 1, 2, 3 from left to right or right to left, it is very likely that you will get all different answers. You will get 50% this way and 50% that way. So this is one example. If there are say pumps, there are 3 pumps on the roof, which is pump number 1, 2, 3. These are the areas. I mean, these are examples, but this will show that how important it is to have a accurate asset register, because without that, all above chain, this is a process chain, so this will get impacted and affected. And for having a good asset register, now this is the last point, is very important, is about you should be aware of the management priorities. Now normally the scope, the asset register is all defined by the facilities management department, but somewhere they need to know, they need to understand what is management's priority, what management wants exactly. And here by this I mean to say that what level of service the management wants to provide to its customers. Now this has to be important. This is something which is a decision of the management of the company, not the facility management's department of the company. For example, if a company management might say that, okay, I want my customer service request to be attended within 2 hours, and the facility management, why is it unnecessarily making it within 1 hour or half an hour or even 3 hours? So these kind of things has to, the level of cleanliness, for example, The management might say, okay, for me a reasonable clean is good enough. I don't need to go to a hospital standard cleanliness, because hospitals are ultra clean. They are the maximum clean assets in the world are hospitals. So the residential assets don't need to go into the hospital kind of category of cleanliness. So that decision has to come from management at a very broad level to say what level of service is required. Because once that input comes clearly from the management, then the facility management team should go on defining about the scope and about the SLAs and the KPIs and all these things. So now let's talk about the balance scorecard. Now the balance scorecard is a mechanism, is a matrix where all the critical parameters are evaluated. Now generally, as a standard practice, the standard parameters which are there included in the scorecard, balance scorecard, are customer satisfaction, maintenance activities, EHS, commercial aspects. These comprise of the almost 90 or 100% of all the criteria, all the parameters. There will be some lot of sub branches into this, but finally these are the heads under which all criteria that is measured under balance scorecard will come. And the management has to decide, the facilities management team has to decide how much weightage they are going to give for all these criteria. For example, EHS is something which is non-negotiable. Again, there is no compromise on the EHS part of it. Commercial aspects is about billing and invoicing, the cycle, the schedules for that, and how it has been adhered to. Maintenance activities, as we said earlier, about the annual maintenance and about the following the regime, how the critical equipments are being maintained. And customer satisfaction is about the responsiveness, how the customer service requests are being attended, how many repeated complaints are there, why there are repeated complaints, is it the spare parts used by service provider are not good, or the technician is not correct, or the system of deploying the technician is not correct. There are various parameters. So these will be all measured through the balance scorecard. Now each parameter has to be given a due weightage as per the company's priorities, because every company has got its own right to define, to say, okay, I want to give customer satisfaction the highest. Some companies might say, sorry, I want maintenance to be the highest because customers will keep coming and going. So there are various criteria for that, and the management has to decide about how much weightage they are going to give for each of the parameter within the balance scorecard. Now there are target scores set for each of the parameters. The balance scorecard, the beauty of that is that they are all not weighted equally, all of them. If there are say 5, it is not that 20% weightage for each of them. Some could be 10, some could be 30, some could be 25. And then there is a target score for each of the criteria that is there for passing. I mean to say, okay, this is acceptable and this is not acceptable, or this is the score you aim to achieve. In EHS, it is always, again, as I said, it is 100%. So this is what you want. If there is a deviation, then that has to be with a justification. So this kind of thing. And lastly, the incentive and the penalty process. Now, for motivating or inspiring any person in this world, you need to have some kind of an incentive. If there is only penalty in the system, penalty all of us have. Most of the people have penalties in the scorecard to say if you don't achieve, you will be penalized. However, incentive is also important. All are humans. There are no robots. As of now, the system has not evolved to that level where there are only robots or machines working in the field. They are all human beings. So human beings, motivating factor is an incentive. And incentive is the thing which will drive the person to excel in his field, or even attempt to excel at least. The incentive will make him to go that extra mile. The incentive will make him get that belongingness. It will say that yes, this is my company. I am working for this company. So a good incentive system will definitely ensure that the results are far more. It is like the relation of X and 10X. You give X incentive, but you get 10X in return from the other side. So this is the importance of the incentive. Now the next is about the implementation. Now the challenges in the implementation. Now what happens is, in the challenges, there is a lack of clarity in the asset register or the scope or the contract document or SLAs or the KPI. Now this is something maybe sounding funny, but then it so happens that the contract documents are drafted by a team, and then it goes to the contract, the legal team, and both sides they agree, disagree and all that. But however, many times there are a lot of complicated legal terms and a lot of description in these documents. So this, if there is no clarity in this, then it will lose its sanctity. Then people will not really read it in detail and really try to follow it. They will say, okay, fine, there are some things written there and we will go ahead with that. But what is worse, is that if there is a proper clarity also, but lack of understanding of any of the above by the members of the client and FMSP, the service provider. Now, again, as I said, the lift 1, 2, 3 and the pump 1, 2, 3, this is again another test. The KPIs and the SLAs of any contract usually are understood by a handful of people in the service provider and a handful of people in the client side, because there is a team associated with this task and it is their job only. But the rest of the entire team, they are not exactly aware. And that's why if you take even one, for example, say 10 KPIs out of the total number of KPIs and ask its interpretation, ask its meaning to the different team members from service provider and from the client, you are going to get 10 different answers for this. And this is definitely not the right way. This is the challenge in implementing the a good system of performance measurement system. So there have to be periodical refresher classes or sessions where these things are all clarified, and the intent behind this document, what exactly is intended, is coming out clearly and is shared with everyone, so that all the people are on the same page. It should not remain like a domain or a copyright of only certain few people in the organization who will only understand it, and rest people follow blindly what is written as per what they assume it is to be. Now, this KPI, the balanced scorecard system and the performance measurement, is many times it is done more as a ritual and a prerequisite for payment, because this is all linked to finally payment, because the finance department, they have got their own fancy and they take much pleasure. They say, have they passed, have they cleared, have they provided services to you? So how do we know whether they have provided service or not? Is through the KPI and the balance scorecard. So the process of evaluating the balance scorecard is done as though it is like, okay, it is pending for payment. Once the payment is done, then everything, people forget about it. Not exactly forget, but they don't give that much priority. The objective of the KPI and the balance scorecard is not just for payment. That will come ahead in the future slides to say what exactly is intended out of it. Payment is of course one. All of us, this is a basis of the contract. You get to be paid for the services, but that is not the sole aim of the contract. There are many more things which are more value adding and long term in the KPI and the balance scorecards. Now, used by the evaluating team of the client to show their clout on the FMSP. It happens many times that the client, because he is in the driver's seat, this is a well-known fact. There is nothing to hide or nothing to say, it's a fact that in the facilities management industry, the client always has upper hand. The client says, I am paying you, so I am the boss. And then this mechanism of performance measurement is used by the client's team to show their clout on the FMS service provider, to say that, okay, you want good marks here, then do 1, 2, 3. Otherwise, you will be failing into this. What is this? What is that? It's like a police or an RTA inspector going on fining the people for traffic violations or the wrong parkings and all that. That should not be the objective of this process. That definitely, if a service is not delivered, there has to be a penalty. There is no doubt about that. But the objective should be to see 90 good and not the 10 bad that are in the system. 10 bad are important, but also look at the 10 of the 90 good that is happening, because one thing is there. In facilities management field, client and service provider, they both are sailing together. Either they both succeed or they both fail. It never happens that client succeeds and the service provider fails, or vice versa. It's a team. Between them, they might have any differences, but for the management, the top management of the client, it's all one team together. So nowhere there should be kind of a gap to say, okay, I am superior to you or you are superior to me, because both need each other. Without each other, they cannot survive. They are the eyes and ears. The service providers are the eyes and ears of the client on the ground. They entirely have the security is there. The whole asset is in their control and their command. So some trust has to be there. Some optimism has to be there in the process, and it should not be just to say that, okay, I am on a higher position, so I will use my cloud and this kind of thing. Okay, now the benchmarking, a part of the performance management. Now, benchmarking is one of the very important criteria in the performance management, which will really make the things very clear, whether how you are doing good or bad or whatsoever. Benchmarking is very simple. It says in Dubai Marina, for example, if there are two buildings of two different developers, now the benchmarking would say that if these buildings are identical, the occupancy levels are identical, and the level of customers is also identical. Sorry to say, we should not go into the level of customers, but the management's decision to provide the service levels to the customers, if it is same, then the expenditure also has to be same. So benchmarking will reflect, it will show whether the facility management services are being provided at the right cost or not, and what exactly is happening. So there are various important parameters of evaluating or of understanding the service level through the benchmarking. I have listed maybe 5 or 6 of them, but they are infinite. It's like a pivot table. In pivot table in Excel, what you can do is infinite. You can do any amount of possible combinations or permutations to find out what exactly you want. Likewise, in benchmarking, you can get any amount of very meaningful results by doing the benchmarking. Some I have given just to enlighten. Now the operating cost of important services per square feet. For example, if one building has got say 200,000 square feet, and then the cost per square feet is say 6 dirhams or 8 dirhams or 10 dirhams. Now the second building adjacent to it, if it is identical, it should have the same cost. So you will not know only by one building whether the cost is high or low. That is not correct. I mean, you may still know from your previous experiences and from some references, but benchmarking exercise will always help you to know whether the services are being provided optimally or not. And the benchmarking, when I say, it is now I know that in the audience it's a mix of client as well as service provider, so I am trying to be balanced in all this, because MEFMA is a unique and a very wonderful body where all its members are from both sides, from client as well as service provider. So if you are a service provider, then you should benchmark the assets with your different assets with different clients. And if you are a client, then you should have, if you have multiple assets, then you should benchmark it with different assets, or ask the service provider his information about where all he is providing similar services, and he may even blank out the names of the customers because of confidentiality reasons. But benchmarking is very important, because that will show you the operating cost of important services, which is like housekeeping, security. The elevators of course are standard, then the fire system is there are some variations, and but most varying things are the housekeeping, the security, and the air conditioning maintenance based on the comprehensive level of services that you have, and the civil maintenance and all these things. So the other thing is staff deployment per square feet. Through benchmarking you will know, for example, if there are two identical buildings, it's not fair that one building has got say 20 technicians and one has got only 10. Now it may happen still, but because the building with 10 technicians may have adopted a lot of automated features, automatic machines and all that. But how will you know? Unless the building which has got 20 technicians knows that there is a technology available which can be gainfully employed to reduce the manpower by having these kind of machines, you will not go into that. And the way to know whether something good is available in the market is only by benchmarking. So you need to do the benchmarking to see where you stand in the market. Where are you? There are 50 people in the race. Benchmarking will tell you whether you are first, second, or 49th or 50th or 25th, 26th, where you stand exactly. So this is what the benchmarking will reveal. The next is the electricity and the utility charges per square feet. This is very important because electricity costs are very huge. I mean, they are almost like 30% of the total FM costs in a chiller building for any facility. So the service provider may not be operating the buildings in a proper manner. They may be switching on the corridor ACs in the common areas and keeping the doors open. That will increase the electricity consumption. But how will we know? By benchmarking. So benchmarking is a must. I mean, it's like it's the thing for doing any performance kind of measurement to know whether you are good or bad. Only one person, only one kind of figures and valuation will not let you know whether you are doing it really well or not so well. Service request and customer complaints per customer. Now this is again very important. This will show many things. I mean, from this one particular point you will know many things. You will know whether the competency levels of the technicians, you will know the attitude of the technicians, you know the scheduling mechanism used by the service provider, whether it is good or bad. You will know the spares used by the service provider are good or bad. You will know the quality of customers that are there also sometimes. So many things you will come to know from the service request and customer complaints per customer. So again, if you are service provider, measure it across all your assets. If you are a client, measure across all your assets. If not, ask service provider to give his other contracts by names being blinded from the sheet. Number of calls attended by technician per day. This is very important. This will show the productivity of the technicians. Because if he is attending only say 3 calls or 2 calls or 4 calls, which is below the average, normally it can be even 6 or 10 based on the type of assets and the type of the facility that is there. So, but having identical asset, comparison with the identical asset will let you know how it is performing. Okay, now the case study of the JLL. Now JLL is one of the world leaders and one of the big companies worldwide about the for providing all real estate solutions, in which facility management is also one of that. So they have evolved their performance measurement system from current state into the future state. So how they have really evolving, how they are evolving, it's still in the process. So like I have given both, and the color coding here is different because so that you know which parameter is being considered. So if we go quickly through this sheet, the current state, which is there with most of the people existing right now, is that there is a periodic data collection. Like we say the performance of the last quarter, performance of last month. That is how the evaluation is done. But now they want to say the future state. Going forward, they want to have a continuous data, the real-time data collection. It should not be to say only a post-mortem of the service evaluation that is happening. The second point is largely financial measures. Like now, currently, most of the KPI or the SLAs and the scorecard parameters are some way linked to the financial parameters, but then financial as well as non-financial parameters should be given equal importance. Now there is disconnected from the wider strategy. Now currently the SLAs and the KPIs are generally like they are within the FM world. I mean FM people, they define their own SLAs, KPIs to say this is what should be the best for that. However, going forward, it has to be aligned with the strategic aims and objectives of the company. Now facility management, their SLAs and KPIs should directly or indirectly link to the company's objectives, because they are a department of the company. And they cannot have an independent kind of a system which is running in a different direction to say that, okay, I will have my own SLAs and KPIs. No, it doesn't work like that. So there every SLA and KPI should aid, should support the companies, the main companies' priorities, their objectives and their policies. Currently it is all backward looking and retrospective. This is a part of the first point only in a rephrased manner, and it will be going to be mix of past, present and the future measures, the performance measurement criterias. And lastly, it's the metrics viewed as an efficiencies and numbers. Like currently in many of the companies or many scorecards are being said, okay, you passed, no, pass, yes, no, you failed by this point, okay. The emphasis is on whether you passed, whether you failed, how you failed, how much margin and all. But then in future they want to say that is not our objective, to see whether he has passed or failed. That is definitely there. But the output of this should come out for driving transformation, for enabling change and for tracking the value creation. So SLAs and KPIs are very beyond that. And in future, this is what they are evolving. So they are defining and redefining their SLAs and KPIs to match with this kind of new technologies or new outlook or new perspectives. Now these are some of the other standard best practices. One is that KPI should be aligned with the organization strategies, as we just now said. It cannot have an independent separate set of SLAs and KPIs to say, okay, I will follow this. It has to be always aligned with the organization strategies. Second is keeping the KPIs as objective as possible. Now it is to be black and white. I mean, it cannot be say, I feel so or I assume so, because there can be different of opinions. Everyone has a different eye. I mean, the CEO, usually all the CEOs, they will have a good eye for detail. They will say this is not good. For the people on the ground level, they have a lot of problems. They will say, oh, this is okay. What is the problem in this? I mean, this is acceptable. This should be fine. But the level of acceptance is different from different people. So when the evaluation happens, the service provider and the client has to be on the same page. It cannot be a dispute to say that this is good or this is not good. And the only way to achieve that is by having the KPIs as objective as possible. Either it is white or it is black. It cannot be grey in between to debate whether it is whitish or it is blackish grey. So that kind of thing. Involving the senior management from both sides for finalization of score. This will be good for many ways, because the senior managements will also come to know how the services are happening. and there'll be a good coordination, a synchronization between both the teams that are together as a team. They are working on the ground. So it will be always good practice to have both the senior managements while finalization of these scores, and emphasis more on improvement rather than fault finding. As we said again earlier, also we discussed, it should not be that you failed, or this is not delivered, so I will be penalizing. These are all there, but that is not the objective. The objective, because if a service provider fails repeatedly, it is a failure of the client. It is not just service provider. If a service provider has failed repeatedly at one particular point, it reflects automatically to the client that client has not taken enough measures to see that the service provider improves. And that is the job of the client. The client has to ensure that he has to give a helping hand to the service provider to rise to the occasion. It's fine, it's both ways. The service provider, being a professional, he is supposed to advise the client on many matters which client may not be aware of. There is nothing wrong. Client is not always omniscient. Omniscient is the word, that is knowing everything. Client may not know, and it is very logical because service provider is a professional in the company. I mean, he is providing services in the market to say, I am a facilities management expert. So there is nothing that the knowledge always only with the client. Knowledge will be with service provider also. So it is both ways, and whenever there are any shortcomings, the objective should be fine. It is limited to that yes, why it has happened, the troubleshooting or the fault analysis, the root cause analysis of that. However, it should be always also seeing that going forward, how to avoid this, how to overcome this, and how to improve, how to enhance, how to excel further. That should be the ideal objective. Tracking mechanism for the action plan on weak areas. Now, generally, whenever there is a evaluation of the scorecard performance, and then there are scorecards, and then there is evaluation, wherever there is a failure, there is an action plan immediately done to say, okay, this is where it has failed and these need to be improved. However, in some cases, there will not be enough attention given to the tracking whether it is really improved or not, because by the time you move to the next quarter and the next month, and then it goes to the new, so the previous things, they get slightly buried. And there is nothing worse than that, because unless you rectify your old systems, old problems, you cannot move forward, because they will continue to be there as it is. So there has to be a good weightage given to the old and the previously noticed shortcomings, and it is client's responsibility also to ensure that the service provider improves in that area. And lastly, reviewing and updating the KPIs periodically. KPIs are not something like a Bible. I mean, KPIs should be reviewed very periodically, maybe say 2-3 years or 3-4 years, like 3 years or 5 years. Because the reason is because the company's objectives keep changing. Company is a dynamic entity. Company will never have a standard kind of thing to say, my objective is only like this. Their mission, vision and values, of course, they remain the same, because that is the way of doing the business. But what exactly they want to do could differ sometimes. Sometimes they may say, okay, I want to do ABC. And sometimes the management say, okay, I want to drop B, but I want to start doing D. So in which case, the objectives of the companies differ, their priorities differ. So accordingly, the KPIs, a standard way, should be also reviewed every 3, 4 or 5 years and seen whether every point is still relevant from the management's perspective. Because if a management doesn't give weightage for one particular criteria, there is no point in excelling in that criteria, because the management doesn't care whether you do it or not. Maybe there is some other criteria which the management is very dear to that. Management may think very important, and if you are not even doing it in performance measurement, it's not justice being done. So likewise, KPI has to be periodically reviewed and updated accordingly. Now, this is an annual compliance review. This is I think my last slide. So this will take around 3 to 5 minutes, and then I will be open for the question and answer session. Now, the compliance review, this is one concept which is internationally used. This is something, again, as I said, there is a mix here of the service provider as well as the client. So this is generally should be done by the service providers top management. Now what it shows is that, like, every company has got an audit department. Now this audit department reports to the CEO directly. Audit department never reports to anyone in between. It is a straight reporting to the CEO. Likewise, this annual compliance review of the service provider should be also done by somebody who reports to the CEO of the company, because that will show how the company is performing. And if it is a client, if you are a client, then you can recommend, you can ask your service provider that they should do these things as a goodwill gesture, because unless the service provider is at comfort unless the service provider's personnel are happy, they will not be able to deliver the services to the client. This is a very clear fact. If the people on the ground are not happy, they can never deliver good service, which is bad for client as well as for the service provider. So a client can never enforce this system on the service provider, but he can recommend. And if you are a service provider, you must do this. This is in good interest of your own organization, and this should be done by the CEO of the company, and directly the team who is doing this compliance review should report to the CEO. Let us take some of the points here, and this is just an indication. There could be many points. For example, employee happiness. Now, it's a known fact, if a technician or a service provider, if a guard, a housekeeping cleaner, if they are not happy, they cannot perform well. So how is their labor accommodation on ground, how comfortable they are, how is their transport system, are they required to wait for 2 hours after the shift to wait for the bus to take them to the labor camps? These are all the points. So the happiness of the employees is very important from the service provider's perspective. Their level of the labor camps has to be good. They should not be accommodated more number than what is prescribed by the Dubai municipality. So these are all the points which come under the employee happiness. Their salary, whether it is paid or not on time, whether they have any issues with the leave sanctioning. So these are all the things that should be known to the top management, because there are many things which the senior management or the CEO does not know, which many things happen in between. The sub-vendor management. The service provider has to also ensure that their vendors, their sub-vendors, because they outsource some of the services, whether their contracts have been signed, whether their LPOs have been issued, whether their payments have been made correctly at time or not. This is very important, because unless that is done, they are a part of them. These subcontractors represent the service provider to the client. So if they fail, it is the service provider's failure, as good as that. So it should be ensured that their LPOs are released on time, their payments are given on time, and everything associated with that. Now the statutory compliances of all the stakeholders. Every subcontractor also should have their own certifications, whatever statutory and standard certifications are there for providing those services, they should be in place, and that should be checked. Now this slide says that it's only review. It can be also partially called audit, but I did not say it audit, because audit suddenly becomes like repulsive. Audit becomes like escaping kind of thing, or hiding something, or something like penalizing. This is just a review. This will ensure that your system is healthy. This is like a preventive healthcare checkup that you go once in 2 years or once in 1 year to a diagnostic center and say, check all my parameters, how good or how bad I am. It is like this. So if this is done, then you can be assured that your company is good. Generally it will be good if you do this. If this is bad, your company can never be good. So statutory compliances have to be good. And then the invoicing and the procurement process, as I said, yes, invoicing, and this is again the point reflecting from both the sides, whether it's the subcontractors to the service provider and service provider to the client. Whether they have been raising all the invoices correctly, because many times it happens that the invoices come after 6 months, after 1 year, and then there is a huge amount of chaos in the system. The finance departments that time will stick to their gun. They will say, sorry, now I will not, because my books are closed, and they will say my audit objection is coming. And now there is another VAT issue is also there. So again, making new invoices, then reconciliation of the earlier VAT payments. So these are all many things. These all will be avoided if there is a compliance review happening where this is checked periodically, whether the systems are in place or not. You don't need to do it on a daily basis or a monthly basis. It's an annual exercise, preferably, where you check the systems in place, processes in place. And then, this will ensure that on day-to-day basis, the operations keep happening correctly. The stores management process. Now, the stores management is very important. Now, the client per se will not have any direct say in the stores management of the service provider, because client, it is none of his botheration. He will say, I don't care. As per my contract, you are supposed to deliver this service to me, including spares if it is required. It is your headache from where you get it. But the stores, whether it is managed properly, whether how they have got the list of all the suppliers with them, what are the terms at which they will supply, whether there is any credit with them, and how fast they can deliver, how many options you have in the market, that is all the capability of the service provider. And that will be known through this compliance review. This is the senior management tool to be used by the service provider, senior management, to check each of their individual departments to see whether they are all functioning well. Because if they are functioning well, then the company overall be in a position to provide good services to the client. And then lastly, the audited financial reports of all the parties involved. That is, even the subcontractors. If it's a subcontractor, you need to know his financial status. Now, the financial reports are for only one reason, that if some of the stakeholder, when I say stakeholder, there are several subcontractors and there is a service provider. If any of them is not doing well, that becomes a weak link in the system. And financial reports will reveal how profitable or how comfortable financially he is in the system. Because if any company is not doing well, and generally they of course want to hide these things till the last minute, and then there will be a lot of inconvenience for everyone else. So that the financial reports will reveal whether they are really doing good or not. It's like a check. It's just a point to say, okay, if this is good, then it's good for me to move ahead, kind of thing. So with this, I have